Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast, bringing you the latest from the world of sports, DFS, and gambling. With over 5 years of hot takes and millions of downloads later, I guess he's been doing something right. Now, sit back and listen to one of the sharpest minds in the game. Here's your host, Dwayne Callender.
Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. We have the West to break down for the NCAA bracket this year. And realistically, how the West is going to be won pretty much comes down to who can rebound. Because we've got a number of teams that can get up and down the court. The question is, can they be efficient enough on offense to seal the deal? Because we've got an overall number one seed that's not actually statistically the top-ranked team in their own region. Kansas is the one seed in the West, but I'll give you a hint as to who the overall highest-rated team from KenPom rankings is. And they play in the Northeast. It's UConn. UConn is actually the highest ranked team, according to KenPom, in the West region. UConn as a 4 seed technically profiles better than the 1 seed in Kansas. Now, Kansas is the defending champion, and they got the defending champion buff, if you will. But from a profile standpoint, offensively, Kansas isn't as proficient as they have been in the past. From a tempo standpoint, they do move quickly, which I'm always in favor of. But they do have the coach advantage in terms of Bill Self over Danny Hurley. I will say that. The question it comes down to for Kansas is, realistically, where do we see this team? Because Bill Self technically is supposed to be cleared to coach for the NCAA tournament. Now, for those of you who don't know, Bill Self took a medical leave of absence because he was not healthy going into the bulk of the year. Now, Kansas still won the Big 12 regular season title, and they made it to the championship game in the Big 12 before getting beat by Texas. And guess what? you have the scenario of Kansas being in a draw where, yeah, this is they still get the 1 seed. Texas gets bounced into the Midwest, so they don't actually have to deal with them in this region. So it was actually more of a blessing than a curse, except for the fact that because of Texas getting bumped up, it also, in a sense, locked Kansas into a matchup down the line against either UCLA or Gonzaga based off of where they're going to get ranked. Now, in terms of the region itself, I think Kansas profiles extremely well, but I will say this from a statistical measure, UConn is a bad matchup for Kansas. UConn with Sanogo and their size on the interior kind of negates what Kansas usually likes to do with being able to a rebound and get second chance points. I definitely look at the situation where, Agbajai and Sanogo battling, this could be a very interesting scenario because, again, provided that UConn handles their business, takes care of Iona, when you start looking at some of these Sweet 16 matchups, the most precarious position I could see for teams is Purdue and Kansas. They have the matchups that when you look at it on paper, they got to stand out to you saying, oh, wait a second, these are the one seeds that I really am taking a hard look at and questioning whether or not I want to pull the trigger, because those upset odds are far, far higher than anywhere else. And again, I don't necessarily think that UConn beating Kansas is an upset. Realistically, UConn just couldn't get the big win to get themselves up into a higher seeding to be where Marquette is as a 2 seed, because UConn has all the tools of being a 2 seed, but they just didn't have enough signature wins in the quad 1 section. But UConn has everything you want in terms of a team that can knock off a number 1 seed, and Kansas has has to deal with that reality. The biggest thing out of this region comes down to, again, we know the bugaboo with Danny Hurley has been coaching and getting his team ready for the opening rounds, because UConn has not won a first-round game in the NCAA tournament since, I believe, 2017. And the biggest issue for UConn, by and large, tends to be foul trouble. Now, again, does Iona pose a threat as a 13 seed to knock off UConn? Yes, if only because of Rick Pitino coaching. And if you want to coach for a one-game scenario that can get his guys ready to play and execute a game plan, Rick Pitino's your guy. Now, I'm going to go with the thought process that UConn will be ready to go and ready to execute. But when I saw that draw and realized that the NCAA, for TV purposes, knowing that Rick Pitino is likely coaching for St. John's immediately after this NCAA tournament wraps up for the Gales, they intentionally scheduled this so that they already start off the Big East rivalry talk between Pitino and Hurley. I look at this and I'm just not going to buy into the narrative. I'm just going to look at where I kind of know where these teams are. I mean, Iota, great story, but there's no way that they should be able to beat this Connecticut team when they're on their game. Realistically, this would be a panic situation, and I'm gonna avoid the C word when it comes to UConn. I think UConn takes care of business. I don't think they slip on a banana peel. So I think they handle Iona, and then the next round between St. Mary's and VCU. I know a lot of people are high on St. Mary's. I've watched St. Mary's throughout the year. I'm not impressed by St. Mary's. And truth be told, if Gonzaga didn't have such an easy draw to start off with, I'd be more down on Gonzaga. I'm not impressed by the West Coast Conference this year, truth be told. But I do think St. Mary's figures it out and takes care of business against VCU. But I think for UConn, Iona's a tougher matchup for them than St. Mary's. I think once they get out of that first round of the jitters, having to play St. Mary's, I think UConn settles in and just handles them. I'm not necessarily concerned from a St. Mary's standpoint of them knocking off UConn and then knocking off Kansas. I don't see that happening at all. I do think that there's enough holes in what St. Mary's likes to attack from an offensive standpoint that they're just not going to be able to get into their set offense and try to get on the inside and get some dribble penetrate. I don't see it. I could be wrong, but like the way St. Mary's wants to play, I don't think they're going to be able to get the easy baskets that they're accustomed to. And I think Gonzaga's going to run into the exact same situation where the easy baskets they've been able to get to in the West Coast Conference games, I don't think they're going to be there. So I'm more down on Gonzaga and St. Mary's than most people. It's just that with Gonzaga's draw, Grand Canyon, happy to be there type story. I don't see Gonzaga losing there. And TCU, I'm more down on. Now, Arizona State, is an interesting wild card as the 11th seed if they can knock off TCU, and then you get a Gonzaga-Arizona State matchup. Arizona State has the backcourt where they could actually have a good shooting night and be able to knock off a Gonzaga, or Gonzaga, as they like to say. But the crux of the matter is, at the end of the day, between what we say about the draw, the elephant in the room is UCLA. UCLA is the top team that I don't think enough people are talking about, because UCLA is still the highest ranked team in this region, and they're a 2 seed. In the top half of the draw, it's UConn as a 4, and they're a 4 seed. UCLA is a 2 seed in the West, and they're the second ranked team in the country, right behind Houston, according to KenPom rankings. So again, for the folks that are picking Kansas to make it to the Final Four, it's not that I hate Kansas. It's just that watching all three of these teams play throughout the year, I can see Kansas losing 6 out of 10 to UConn and 8 out of 10 to UCLA. I do think it is that decisive because of what UCLA can do defensively. Now, is there a concern because of the fact that the injuries that they are running into down the line? Now, Jalen Clark suffered an Achilles injury in the Pac-12 tournament, and he's going to be out for the rest of the season. The thing of it is that they have multiple experienced ball handlers on that squad. It's a senior group. They play the grimy defense that Mick Cronin is known for. Now, am I a fan of Mick Cronin? No. I think, truth be told, the guy has a massive Napoleon complex. But he can coach. And he can coach defense. The bottom line is that they shoot fewer three-pointers than pretty much any team in the country, but they crash the boards, they force turnovers, and again, from an offensive standpoint, efficiency-wise, they're a top 25 team. Defensively, they force a lot of turnovers. This is a Mick Cronin team, and this is one of the most talented teams Mick Cronin has ever had. I look at this as a pretty much an Elite Eight type squad. I think they handle Gonzaga. I don't really see, if Gonzaga beats UCLA, then you may as well pick them to make it to the Final Four. That's the way I look at it. If you want to handle your brackets that way, if Gonzaga knocks off UCLA, they're going to the Final Four. In my opinion, UCLA takes this region pretty much as it stands. If we ran this simulation like 100 times, I think UCLA wins this West region 80% of the time. I feel that confident on the UCLA side of the draw that as good as Kansas can play, and even Gonzaga on their I think UCLA is better. Again, the injury could be a potential concern, but from a region standpoint, I just look at this as a case where I'm heavily slanted towards UCLA. If I go down with a team, I'd rather be at UCLA in terms of how I set up my brackets this year. If I get beat by UCLA, I get beat. But I do think that in terms of matchups being favorable and what they're afraid of losing to, like realistically, you need a team that can play fast, shoot a lot of threes, and hit a lot of threes to get them out of their defense. Basically, UCLA's not facing that until Alabama. And they're on complete distant sides of the brackets. I don't see a team that can shoot at that volume and play good defense to force UCLA out of their comfort zone. I think you're basically it's going to have to come down to either Alabama or Houston to knock off UCLA. And the only other squad that I would say besides Houston or UCLA, Houston or Alabama would be Arizona, because we've seen Arizona match up well enough against this UCLA team to beat them. Arizona has that in them. But I have a tougher time believing in a Marquette taking out a UCLA. I think it's very matchup dependent for some of these squads for it not to be UCLA in the Final Four. And again, once you're in the Final Four, unless I see Alabama or Houston in that bracket, I have a tougher time. Or Arizona. I'll give Arizona a bit of a doubt there. I have a tougher time rationalizing how UCLA doesn't win that Final Four. I think it's a very distinct matchup style that you need to beat a UCLA, and I don't think a ton of these teams have what it takes. So that's where I look at from the West. We're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to give some insight as to a couple of plays in the opening rounds that you can kind of target from a betting perspective. So stay tuned.
Don't go anywhere. The Fantasy Throwdown Podcast will be right back after our sponsors pay the bills. Welcome back to the show. Hope you got your popcorn ready.
All right, we are back. A couple of picks to kind of talk about. One, mainly this Miami Drake game. Being perfectly honest, this line being as tight as it is, I think you kind of take Drake outright. The issue is the fact that this line is still at the 2.5. I think you can just take Drake outright to beat Miami. The ACC was weak this year. It's not as though we should be surprised when any of these ACC schools get bounced. There is some concern in terms of how they match up. And if I would say this is one of those teaser situations where you could even tease both the Drake game with the Virginia versus Furman game. Virginia's favored by 5.5. I do think Virginia beats Furman, but it's a tight. It's like that line. I think they probably beat Furman by 6 or 7 points. But if you tease that with the Drake game to the point where you're getting at least you're getting the 4.5. Now you're talking 10 points with Furman, and then you beat Drake at +7. I think you can naturally throw those two into a teaser, Drake and Furman, into a teaser versus Virginia and Miami, and I kind of like attacking it from that standpoint, from a teaser standpoint. In terms of some of these other matchups, Utah State. We're going to get a number of points in this matchup. Now, the question is, do I want to take Utah State outright? I do kind of like Utah State, but I'll take the over on the game as well. From a scoring standpoint, neither one of these teams is going to be that proficient at slowing the other side down. I do think you're going to be able to get value out of maximizing what these teams can offer, because from my outlook, there is some value in terms of attacking the offensive proficient teams that are not as inclined to play defense. And then in terms of San Diego State and Charleston, a lot of people are picking this Charleston upset. I don't see it. I like San Diego State, and I like them at the 5.5. I think they handled Charleston. If your brackets involve seed and upset points, you can try to go for the Charleston play. I don't see it. I think San Diego State's better on both sides of the ball, and I think they just grind. I think they just grind down Charleston. Truth be told, and keep it physical. So to me, I think that's where I'm leaning. Now, everyone's wondering about this Duke Oral Roberts game. People were talking up Oral Roberts as a threat to Duke. I think Duke wins. Now, do I think Duke covers the 6.5? Here's the thing. This Duke team plays slow. So it wouldn't shock me if this game's tight and then people were wondering, how good is this Duke team? Because that should have been a question that should be asked a lot over the weekend, and I did not hear that asked nearly enough. I do think Duke wins, but the 6.5 is what has me a little bit questioning it. It's not enough for me to bet Oral Roberts, but I'm not exactly going to be surprised if Oral Roberts covers it at plus 6.5. I'd be more than tempted to throw that into a teaser with some of these other underdog picks and see how it works out. But, yeah, that's where I'm kind of leaning, folks. So we're going to get on out of here. But, in terms of some of the outrights, obviously you have Houston. I love UCLA as an outright as well. I just think that, in terms of the squads that can win it all, there's way too much lack of resistance to UCLA, in my opinion. At 10-1, I think it, and some places you can get it 12-1. I'm more inclined to take UCLA as an outright. Houston's always good value, and Alabama makes a ton of sense. I'm not on the train of thought where the folks are calling for Purdue. Purdue is still at the same odds as UCLA, and Purdue has way more threats to them than UCLA does. I don't believe in the Purdue outright. I don't believe in the Kansas outright because of what I said about UConn and UCLA. I just think it's too risky of a pick. But the UConn to win it all. Now, again, could they get knocked out by Iona? Yes. They could easily get knocked out by Iona. It wouldn't shock me. But if you're getting 20-1 on UConn, I think it's more than worthwhile to take that shot. That's just me personally. So, that's all I got, folks. Best of luck to you in all your brackets. Hopefully this was of some benefit to you. I'm calling it a day for now, but definitely talk more tournament talk throughout the bracket season. So, farewell for now. Good luck.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Throwdown podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and all major outlets.